The new Ryzen AI 300 chips have made their way into gaming laptops, and today we're checking out another ASUS laptop, except this time it's actually meant for gamers. That's right, ASUS's 2024 ROG Zephyrus G16 comes with up to a Ryzen AI 9 HX 370, 32 gigs of memory, an RTX 4070, a 240Hz OLED, and a 2TB SSD for the low price of $2,300. The lower spec model that we have here has 16 gigs of memory, an RTX 4060 8GB, and a 1TB SSD that retails for $1,900. We're gonna run the G16 through a gambit of benchmarks to cover gaming and CPU specific performance, as well as creative apps and AI workloads. We're even able to directly compare performance to a couple of other laptops we've recently reviewed. We'll also be checking out battery life and thermals, but not before we look at this exterior. So, it's got a fully metal chassis that's pretty slim as far as gaming laptops go, at 0.59 inches and weighs just over 4 pounds. This model is in platinum white, but the more expensive model is also available in Eclipse gray. That metal chassis also makes for a high quality feel and look, ensuring extra rigidity and durability as well. Overall, the aesthetic is obviously a little gamerized with the RGB keyboard and ROG logos, but it's not too flashy. On the back of the display, there's also a diagonal slash of white LEDs, which are surprisingly not RGB. I can't wait till they actually come out with the e-ink back panels that we saw at Computex earlier this year. But you can change the slash animation pattern and brightness in ASUS's Armory Crate app, in case you wanna. Now let's take a look at the ports. On the right side, we've got an SD card reader, a 10GB USB-A, and a 40GB USB-C. On the left side, we've got the charging port, an HDMI 2.1 port, another pair of USB-A and C ports, and the audio combo jack. We've also got Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.3. So let's take a look on the internal clamshell. At the top of the display, we do have a bog standard 1080p webcam included. The display itself is a 16-inch 16x10 2560x1600 240Hz G-Sync OLED with 100% DCI-P3 coverage and VESA Display HDR True Black 500 certified. It's a beautiful screen. It's gorgeous. The refresh rate's incredible. We're gonna complain about the price a little bit in this video, but honestly, for 240Hz, a 1600p 16x10 display, it's just, as mentioned, the keyboard is RGB backlit with a handful of effects included in Armory Crate and advanced effects available in the Aura Creator app. The keyboard's, as you would expect, chiclet style keys that look and feel basically identical to the ProArt PX13 we also recently reviewed. If it's not identical, it has a touch less travel distance. It's a much bigger laptop than the 13-inch ProArt, but ASUS has still elected to not include a numpad, instead placing upward firing speakers in the extra space that they save. The speakers do have nice clarity while producing a full sound with plenty of bass, so I can see why this would contribute to a better gaming experience, but I know that the numpad will be sorely missed by some of you, especially me. I use it every day, but I'm also a sucker for not garbage audio on a laptop, and this trade offer is more than acceptable. And just below that keyboard, you can see the massive trackpad that ASUS has included. It works fairly well, and it's clear that they're trying to replicate something that Apple has been doing with their MacBooks. It's one of the largest trackpad surfaces that I have seen on a gaming laptop, and I'm glad they included it here. All right, that's enough of the general side of it. Let's see what this baby can do. For these first tests, we're leaving it plugged in its default profile performance mode to see how it rips out of the box. We're gonna be looking at both the G16's native resolution as well as 1080p results, so it's easier to gauge performance. Since we recently reviewed 2 other AI 300 laptops, we'll be able to include some of that data throughout this review to make some comparisons. All right, in 3D Mark Time Spy, we snagged an overall score of 9514, with the RTX 4060 in here earning a graphics score 16% above the RTX 4050 found in the ProArt PX13 we reviewed previously that has the same HX 370 CPU. The first game we're going to look at is Counter-Strike 2, where at 1080p high preset, we're able to hit just under 200 FPS on average. That's a 35% jump over the ProArt. In 1600p high, that only drops to 141 FPS. Moving on to GTA 5, we're looking at 137 FPS on average with the settings cranked at 1080p, about 13% faster than the 4050 ProArt. Back to its native resolution of 1600p, the G16 is still clear of 100 FPS at 111 on average. In Baldur's Gate 3, the G16 G16 averages 67 FPS at 1080p Ultra. That's 31% faster than the ProArt. And at 1600p Ultra, we're still nearly pushing 60 frames, as our average is at an impressive 57 FPS. If you're set on cracking 60, but instead want to use upscaling, setting DLSS to performance at 1600p Ultra nets us a respectable 66 FPS average. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 at 1080p with the minimum preset selected and 100% resolution scale, the G16 grabs 124 FPS average, which is 17% faster than the ProArt with the 4050. At full 1600p minimum preset, the G16 pulls an average of 78 FPS. Though with Call of Duty, we'd really recommend switching on some kind of upscaling, as we're able to move all the way up to the Ultra preset with DLSS set to performance and climb up to an average of 96 FPS while the visuals improve dramatically. Moving to Cyberpunk 2077, we're again looking at 1080p with the medium preset to get us an average of 103 FPS, a 21% gain over the ProArt. At 1600p medium, the G16 is still good for a 52 FPS average. With DLSS performance enabled, we can up the preset to high and see 73 FPS on average. In Borderlands 3 at 1080p Ultra, the G16 enjoys a 12% lead over the ProArt as it's averaging 76 FPS. If you're more of a native res person, we've dropped the preset to medium at 1600p to swing a 93 FPS average. Now on to CPU benchmarks. The Ryzen AI9 HX370 found in this laptop is sometimes a touch slower than the ProArt PX13 with the same CPU. Since the ProArt is targeted towards creators, the CPU is sometimes given a little more juice to allow it to boost higher. In Geekbench 6, we see it trailing the ProArt by about 13%, performing closer to the Ryzen AI9 365 we've also benchmarked. Oddly, with Cinebench 2024, the G16 performed only 1 to 2% slower than the ProArt in multi-core, within the margin of error, we'd say. In Puget Bench for Creator, we ran the Premiere Pro benchmark to find that the Zephyrus G16 with its RTX 4060 is a whopping 52% ahead of the ProArt with a score of 8519. But now, you know what time it is. It's AI time! We're gonna lean on Opera's new local AI LLM benchmark tool to let us know if this thing is ready for the AI singularity. With the G16, we're able to achieve 109 tokens per second, 23% more than the ProArt with its RTX 4050. The first token latency and model load times were 32.2 milliseconds and 1.6 seconds respectively. In Geekbench ML, the G16 captures a CPU inference score of 3584 and direct ML inference score of 12246. I could have said that more normally, but I didn't. As for battery life, we're first looking at power consumption while running games. By default, Battery Boost 2.0 was enabled in GeForce Experience, meaning the FPS is immediately locked to 30 when you unplug the charger. This meant that while playing Cyberpunk 2077, power consumption from the battery settled in at about 50 watts, so you'll likely get close to 2 hours of gaming on a full charge. That's great if you want to maximize battery life, but we do have a 90 watt-hour battery that could still provide some acceptable playtime with Battery Boost disabled. After disabling it, power consumption about doubled to 95 watts. That's going to result in the battery draining in less than an hour. On the desktop, with nothing going on in the background, the G16 sat at about 15 to 20 watts power draw from the battery in its default configuration, while watching YouTube only required a few more watts at about 23 to 25 watts for the whole system. This should mean that general use would net you about 3 to 4 hours of being unplugged from the wall. When we closed the lid to give it a little nap, the pull from the battery only got down to 11 watts, so don't expect more than 8 or 9 hours of sleep or battery life on this laptop. For our thermal performance testing, we're again looking at data recorded while playing Cyberpunk 2077. About halfway through the test, we disconnected the charger to get a look at how power draw and thermals adjust. While plugged in, the GPU hotspot temperature reached and remained steady at about 94 degrees, while the CPU hotspot settled in at just under 80 degrees. When the charger was disconnected, the GPU hotspot fell to 68 degrees and the CPU hotspot fell to 62 degrees, while the system total power draw sat at 50 watts. When we disabled battery boost again, the GPU went back up to 84 degrees and the CPU sat at 74, while the total power consumption was 95 watts. The surface temperature was pretty reasonable, with the fans pulling fresh air in from underneath where the hands rest on the keyboard, much like ASUS's latest ProArt model. There were areas over 52 degrees in the upper middle section of the keyboard, as well as the bottom of the chassis. The fans aren't afraid to ramp up, so it's down to the fact that this thing will hold close to 100 watts of power draw and has to dump some of its heat into the metal chassis. Overall though, the ASUS Zephyrus G16 brings high performance and great features in a very attractive package. It rocks this absolutely stunning, crisp 240Hz 1600p display, even if it doesn't always have the horses to back it up in games without the use of upscaling. If you're a believer that there's no such thing as a bad product, just bad pricing, we might agree that we're looking at the latter here. I mean, come on, ASUS, this thing costs one whole used early 2000 sedan, though we're thankful it doesn't also smell like one. I remember when the desktop GTX 960 was like $200. Now you're telling me it's worth nearly $2,000 for a laptop with an NVIDIA 60 glass GPU. It's a very premium package and it's pretty compact as far as gaming laptops go. So between the cost of that beautiful display and thermal restrictions to the chassis, it's not all that crazy that they didn't include more under the hood. That price may not be ASUS's fault though, considering behind the scenes reports indicated that AMD wants about double for these AI chips than they were charging for the previous 8840 series. You get a ton of extra CPU performance, but not sure if the price point makes sense for most gamers. We do also want to give props to ASUS for their software, as it's generally pleasant to use even if it still can't fill the crater left in our wallets. The Zephyrus G16s have always been a beloved series of laptops, and it's easy to see why with all of the sleek beauty it brings to the table, both with its chassis and screen. But getting one with more powerful hardware might make more sense when you're doshing out this many clams. There are several options at or even under $1,000 that will offer very similar performance. The question for you as the buyer becomes whether or not the premium metal chassis, brilliant display, and overall quality of this machine is worth it for you.